frame rater.
As I assume everyone knows at this point, Rayman Raving Rabbids started its development as a 3D platformer, traditionally to the other Rayman games before it. In fact, it was called Rayman 4 well before any Rabbids came into the picture. Day by day, the game began turning into something else completely until it was finalized to be the minigame collection we all know of today. However, what happens when you outsource the mobile ports of your game before you finalized your plan? Well, you get something like Rayman Raving Rabbids for the Game Boy Advance, Java ME platform, and Nintendo DS. Having the workflow directed at different teams means each game's gonna be different. I've covered the other two, even this one in the past, but granted it was one of my first videos, so I felt it was necessary to revisit. Firstly, this is being played on an emulator since Nintendo DS capture is notoriously difficult. The emulator is known as Rabbids NDS, which has an excellent OpenGL smoothing filter that makes all these 3D games look a million times better. I mean, just compare before and after, there's really no way I could keep this turned off, right? So, Rayman Raving Rabbids on the DS was outsourced from Montpellier to the Casablanca division of Ubisoft, which to my knowledge had never tackled a Rayman game before this. And it shows, because I'd say the familiarity to the series is akin to someone who played Rayman 2 when it first came out and forgot about it up until working on this game. What I mean by that is, the basic fundamentals of the game are here, but elements that fans are more familiar with would be questionable. Like for instance, Rayman goes around collecting lums that make up the heart of the world, but in Rabbids DS, he collects them to shoot at enemies. Despite the little knowledge of the Rayman universe Casablanca must have had, they at least certainly got a design document from the original team, which gives us some insight to stuff about the original prototype, at whatever stage they had been when they outsourced the DS production. For those of you that have taken a hatred to the Rabbids over the years, I say don't let this one evade you for the sole reason of them being involved here. The Rabbids' personality in this game is more reminiscent of the prototype than any other Rabbids media out there. They're not annoying and lol random as they've since become. They're mean and vicious, like a Rayman foe should be. If anything, I'm disappointed at the entire lack of story other than the Rabbids are coming after you, Rayman. It would have been great if we got more insight to the prototype from this game, since it's more accurate than the rest are otherwise. God forbid the ending. Those moronic bunnies are going crazy, Rayman. Is it because of the free carrot handouts? I mean, maybe it's because I just eliminated their leader. Fun fact, I played this Rabbids game first, and having been so excited from the trailers, I thought for a solid year or so that everything had gone as planned and they didn't last minute turn it into a collection of minigames. I think it's safe to say that most, if not all, the assets from this DS game were at some point intended for the prototype. Like the mechanical machines we never see in other Rabbids games, the squeaky toy thing that craps out lums, the worm, or the weird little creature that Rayman will have to shake off if he gets in contact with them. Defeating enemies in Rabbids DS, by the way, gives you yellow stars that are used to increase the size of your health bar. It's a simple way to make the game more difficult down the road. Too bad the game remains at a fairly consistent easy difficulty though, so it doesn't really matter regardless. The only times I've ever died in this game, whether it be this playthrough or the original playthrough from 2007 I did, seem to only really die by falling into pits. While we touched on the prototype a moment ago, I'd like to divert the attention once more to bring up these elevators Rayman walks into at the end of a stage. Specifically because there's an elevator theme from the prototype that went entirely unused in the final game. And what do you know? I love it. But that sadly wasn't used in this DS game either. The prototype's soundtrack was such a hilarious parody of elegance, the type of music that makes you think of sunshine, vivid flowers, and, well, bunnies. All this suited up to the maniacal mayhem of the Rabbids, and man, that game still sounds like it would have been pretty awesome. Well, at least the assets were used well here, I think, with some charming attention to detail like the Rabbids doing stupid shenanigans in the background scenes. The stages are a mix of 2D and 3D platforming, with Rayman making it from left to right in the style of Klonoa, or I guess Fez for a looser comparison. Some might also understand referencing it to the classic Tower Toppler game. Within these stages you'll find some puzzle platforming with low-key mazes that require pretty basic problem-solving skills to pass. Oftentimes this involves elemental suits that you'll collect in order to manipulate wood, fire, ice, and wind, often to create or unlock certain platforms that will allow you to progress. They're fairly simple, you'll never find yourself confused, but despite its rather basic nature, it's a lot of fun, if this is something you're into, which I know I am. This is all complemented by a beautiful soundtrack that ranges from tribal to outright haunting. Though there's also a bit of pop thrown in there, like Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, likely just because Montpellier had obtained the license for the game. This did, after all, come out a year after the other releases of Rayman Raving Rabbids, for some reason. You'll enter these stages via a genuine 2D hub world that more or less acts as a level select. I'm not sure if I should really call it a 2D hub world, it's more move a Rayman face sprite around the mini arena to choose a stage. Enter one of the levels, each of which housing 3 individual stages indicated by path numbers. Unfortunately, to get to any of the 3 stages, you'll have to trek through a moderately length introduction path to find one of 3 number signs indicating which stage you'll start by then passing said sign. These introductory paths often involve the aforementioned puzzle-solving elements, much akin to the rest of the game. The problem with that is you shouldn't be forced to do them more than once. In Rabbids DS, you'll have to cross these paths up to 3 times just to access a new stage path. This can take upwards of minutes each time, and that's where the game's rushed nature begins to show, because why else would you stuff it with repeated tasks that are pointless other than to make the game feel longer? There were a lot of shortcuts in the development of this game, like the equally pointless auto-runner stages that you'll be forced into just after completing a platforming stage. Essentially, Rayman is put in a predefined, very slow jogging pace, while running through an ultra-linear path with the occasional deviation, which near immediately leads back into itself anyways. The game's idea for these existing is to make use of your elemental powers, or more specifically, give the touchscreen some use. Honestly, these wouldn't even be that bad if Rayman only moved a bit faster and there was a quick restart to checkpoint option, because these are often designed in such a way to be tricky and force you to go back to the last checkpoint in order to pick up a trophy you missed, of which you need to collect all of them to finish a stage. What little non-linearity is here is used almost exclusively to draw you into a false sense of security by walking down an uplifting path filled with lums, while you completely disregard the mission essential item passing by above or below you. Speaking of lums, why are you even able to collect these here? You can't even make use of them until the following stage, and it has no effect on the endgame as far as it makes you aware of. You can collect more lums in total if you find the lum packages, of which there are 3 on each traditional platforming stage. Past the first couple upgrades, you can pretty much ignore these because they serve no real purpose other than projectile weaponry, and since they're all over the place, you never really run out of them. Man, it still feels so weird wasting lums given they were such an important thing to collect in Rayman 2. I guess the best you can say is that this simply isn't Rayman 2. It's Rayman Raving Rabbids. And speaking of the IP, even this isn't exempt from the curse the Rabbids had on the Rayman franchise. Before you start an auto-runner stage, you're greeted with a minigame, each of which loosely if not entirely based on a minigame from the final console release. Nothing wrong with these being here, I guess. You might question why these are here since the development of this one focuses on an earlier version of the game without them. Well, frankly, I'm not sure if the prototype was per se without them. I recall learning at one point that the minigames still took place within the prototype, just not as a focus, and there weren't so many of them. Think about how Rayman 3 did minigames. They felt more like an afterthought, which was probably the case for these as well, which Ubisoft Casablanca I guess felt they would try to pull off for the DS. I mean, it's logical. The DS's touchscreen made too much sense to pass off an opportunity. It was 2007, what can I say? But I reiterate, it won't not feel weird for them to just force you into playing these without any explanation after completing a traditional stage. Another element of force is Rayman's ability to grab onto ledges because, whoo boy, let me tell you, it sure is difficult to fall off a platform to the one underneath without Rayman accidentally grabbing hold of a surface somewhere. You have to take active lengths just to avoid Rayman's grab. This isn't something I would usually reference in a review, but it is far more prominent here than I think any other video game I've ever played. I'd say at least it's forgiving for the player that way, but then they shove these big cogwheels and rocking platforms at you which are extremely difficult to land on correctly. They often go in reverse or at such a fast speed that it's hard to decipher what window of time makes it safe to land without falling into what is usually a void below. As I said earlier, these are pretty much the only times in the game where I died. These might not look at all difficult, but trust me, until you're playing it yourself, you know nothing. So what did I think of— oh, wait a minute, hold on. Right, the sequel. And the sequel's sequel. There's no way I'd ever do a separate video on these, so I figured I'd glance over them for a moment. So these are nothing like the original Rabbids DS. There's no prototype for them to be based off of, so instead they take a similar approach to the console games, which for Rayman Raving Rabbids 2 and TV Party were Nintendo Wii exclusives. Rabbids 2 is a monstrosity that has you redo the same boring, monotonous gameplay tasks over and over and expects you to think of it as entertainment. Besides the visual gags on screen, there is virtually no fun to be had here. And this is coming from someone who played it around the time of release back then. I should have nostalgia for this, but I don't. It's awful. Some of the minigames are even one-to-one recreations of games from Rayman Raving Rabbids 1, and it's pretty embarrassing that those come off as some of the best ones here. The game isn't entirely trash. There are 2, maybe 3 okay minigames, but even then a couple of minigames to justify an entire package? I think not. There's nothing more cringy than watching the Rabbids dance to pop culture references. TV Party is a monstrosity that has you redo the same boring, monotonous gameplay tasks over and over and expects you to think of it as entertainment. At least this time there's a bit more gameplay, but I use that very loosely because it only adds a very limited Mario Party-esque interlude between the minigames. See this minigame here? You turn the turntable as the Butcher's DJ plays. Keep in mind I love this track from the first Rabbids game, and this was the first minigame I ever played in this game back when I got it on launch day. Yeah, I had that much dedication for the Rabbids. Imagine the hundreds of other better things I could have spent my money on. The most fun I had with this was removing the Rabbids' face from its body because of the weird in-between hinge on the Nintendo DS screen. Once you catch up to the television icon in the Mario Party board ripoff, you have to chase the rabbit in an auto runner. Just press the jump button at the right time. Wow, how far we've sunk from the auto runner in Rabbids DS. That in itself I didn't like very much. There's nothing more cringy than watching the Rabbids dance to pop culture references. Rayman is barely in either of these two games, by the way. He's more of an excuse than a character. So what did I think of Rabbids DS? It's great, if a bit flawed in some areas, though the only thing that made me want to not recommend it are the auto runners. Even these aren't terrible, they're just not very good. The other two Rabbids games on the DS, stay far away. I never got Rabbids Go Home on the DS. I was too pissed at buying TV Party, so maybe we'll save that for another day, although I'm not too personally interested in reviewing Rabbids stuff with no affiliation to Rayman himself. I've heard the Wii game for Rabbids Go Home is good, so hey, maybe this one's DS game is a return to form in some aspects. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you frame raiders in the next video.